on commonly misinterpreted measures and mishaps. We're just going to wait 1 or 2 more minutes here to get started, but excited to have you here today. Hey everyone, welcome to today's session. Super excited to have you here. And looking forward to having a really great session for you on commonly misinterpreted measures and mishaps. I kind of put these titles together and then figure out what I'm going to be presenting in them. So I'm going to be focusing in on one measure today. You know, as we continue to move forward with artificial intelligence and machine learning and more automated generated reports and those kind of things, you need to realize that we still need to use our brains behind these numbers. The machines can't possibly capture some of the really important and critical things that you need to understand and drill into as it relates to some pretty common measures that we look at. So I am going to be talking to you today about the index formula. So I'm going to share my screen here and we're going to get started here. Okay, so let's get started. And just to let you know a little bit about CMKG, for those of you who haven't attended one of these sessions yet, we are a training company. We primarily work in the retailer and consumer packaged goods side. We work with a lot of different brands and companies. We really focus in on training. And one of the things that we pivoted to in 2020 from the pandemic was moving from a lot of live classroom training into virtual sessions. And honestly, it was a big, we actually went back to university to learn how to convert our courses into virtual training, how to be more effective in the virtual space. And so that's what we're going to be sharing with you today is an example. This is the third session of 6 that we're actually running to give you some perspective on some of the things that we share. You know, we're not doing as virtual of a session as I would like to in terms of hands-on, because this is a public session. We have a lot of people live streamed, but it is an opportunity for you to kind of understand the opportunities for virtual training with your company. And we're also obviously going to teach you new stuff on specific topics. And for Zoom meeting participants who are registered in this, you'll also be getting access to a resource tool at the end of the session. So excited to have you here today, and thank you for participating. In terms of virtual meeting guidelines, you know, everyone is muted right now. It would be great if you could stay that way, unless you, you know, want to unmute yourself when I ask questions and feel comfortable with unmuting yourself to address something. That's great. You can also change your name. We are in a meeting instead of a webinar, so you don't have that anonymity. So if you do want to change your name to something else so that nobody recognizes you, you can go ahead and do that in the Zoom options. If you're feeling up to it, you can also turn on your camera. One of the things that we really try to get people to do as part of the participation is turn on their camera, because it really helps us to kind of feel connected to each other more than looking at black boxes of names in the session. But I understand if you're, you know, this is not a real virtual session. Also, please stay muted and please participate. I'm just going to be asking you today for some questions, some answers to things in the chat box. So having participation in these is really key in order to make it super successful and insightful and more interesting than just having me talking at you the whole time. So I already mentioned to you, we're going to be talking about the index formula. And this is a number that I continue to see misrepresented and sometimes completely incorrect in terms of how it should be interpreted and how you can use some of these powerful numbers to be able to move your business forward, create goals and objectives, and properly think about it. So we use indexes in a lot of different ways in our business. And I always say indexes, and I know it's indices, and I know John from my team is probably going, Sue, it's indices, not indexes. But anyways, I just feel the need to do that. Oh, and I got to put my glasses on. Not just because I look much smarter, but because I can then actually read my screen. So we use a lot of indices in our business. We use category development index, index versus all sales share, fair share index, index versus year ago, index versus targets. There's all sorts of indexes that you have to be seeing in your business at some level. And so what we're going to be doing today, the thing that you really want to make sure you understand is, are you interpreting these numbers correctly? And what are some ways to kind of dig in deeper to come up with some more compelling information about these numbers? And index is a very basic number, but like I said, I see so much misrepresentation or misunderstanding of what those numbers could or should mean if you inject some other thinking into it. So in this session, we're going to be talking about the first three. We're going to go through examples on category development index, index versus all sales share, and fair share index. Now, these are all explained in much more detail in our course on category assessment. And these are also something that, if you're going to be doing a virtual session with us, that we can customize these based on the descriptions you have, because sometimes people don't call it category development index, they call it something else. So just so that it's incorporated and reflected in the way that you look at your numbers. So first, we're going to talk about the category development index, which is a really important number. That answers the question, what is my retailer share of market for total category and subcategories? And how does it compare across the different subcategories? And so it's a really common number that's used. The formula for it is the retailer share of market by product group. So in this category, it's 27.6 is the total, the retailer share of market by product group. So that would be like the 24.2 in segment 1. And then it's divided by the total category retailer share of market. So just make sure you guys understand what I'm talking about. 27.6% for the category means that this retailer represents 27.6% of the total category business within the total market that they're being measured within. Just to make sure that you understand that. So it's not the same as a category share. And so what would be the interpretation then we've got our category development index numbers, which really help you to compare each of the segment retailer share of markets to the total category share of market. So the formula for the category development index is that 24.2 divided by 27.6, which is the total category share, to equal 88. So segment 1 has a category development index of 88. So if I showed these numbers to you, what would your interpretation of them be? And I'm hoping that some of you can type into the chat box how you would interpret that 88 index number on segment 1. What would that mean to you? So I'm just going to wait, and hopefully somebody will answer the question for me. How would you interpret that number? And the only disappointing answer is one that there's nobody answering. So, sometimes the interpretation might be something like, segment 1 is underdeveloped. Good one, Linda. Simple interpretation there. Retailer is underperforming or under trading in segment 1. So these are the kind of things that you use, so that it's the under and over, because that 100 index really indicates, is it over or is it under? So it's a very, very simple component associated with looking at your overall business results. So what would you do from here? Would you have a recommendation from these numbers based on that 88 category development index for segment 1? Any suggestions on what you would do from here? So My interpretation would not necessarily be that it's overdeveloped or underdeveloped, because traditionally or intuitively, the tendency that we have is to really generalize and think that everything greater than 100 is good or overdeveloped, and anything under that is bad and underdeveloped. And so I still see a lot of that in presentations that I see from clients on a regular basis. It's a very limiting approach to using an index because it's not strategic. And in the example I just showed you with the underdeveloped or overdeveloped, what if segment 1 at that 88, because underdeveloped and overdeveloped has a very strong negative or positive connotation to it. You know, and the thing is you can't interpret those numbers on their own. I can't decide that, okay, segment 1, we need to get up to 100 because we want to be at the same share as market. Why would we want to do that? As a retailer, I want to have my own strategies in place, and I want to be focused on developing in the categories and brands and segments and subcategories that best match up with my target shopper. And so if we're using this really simple approach, and basically if we get everything to 100, then that would mean that we'd be at the same place as the rest of the market on everything. And that's not a very good strategy, honestly. So you can go much deeper and better thinking into your indexes than good or bad. And you can do that. And I think it was Linda who mentioned it in the chat, that you can find some comparative benchmarks, and you can also add in strategic targets and goals. And that's what you need to be thinking about, so that, you know, I can only interpret from these numbers on their own that segments 1, 2, 3 are less developed than the retailer's total category share market, and that segments 4 and 5 are more developed. And that's pretty much all I can say on these numbers based on how they are. And sometimes I even see presentations where there's a really deep interpretation, because it will say, you know, segment 1 is underdeveloped, and it's because they're not advertising anymore like they used to. I can't see anything besides the fact that these segments either are less developed or more developed than the total retailer share of market. And that's it. So if you see numbers like this and somebody is trying to tell you that this means overdevelopment or underdevelopment or opportunities or whatever, challenge it and really dig deeper, because this is so basic, this approach, and it shouldn't even be acceptable as a means just on its own of you guys doing your analytics and making recommendations and decisions on it. So you really can do further analysis with retailer and category strategies to dig into some of the numbers, so that you really think about, okay, segment 5, what if that's private label? And your retailer share of market is 41.9. And so that 152 is very strategic for this retailer, because private label is their biggest corporate objective, is to drive private label, because their consumers are demanding it. It creates a unique offering in their stores that aren't offered anywhere else. And the more they can develop their brand, private label or store brands, the better that uniqueness becomes for them, because those shoppers can't go anywhere else to buy the private label brands. What about if segment 4 is a premium brand, like plant-based protein is a really big and up-and-comer that's going to continue to develop? Well, you want to be strongly developed in those areas where there's a ton of innovation, because you're going to grab a share, and typically you're going to hang on to that share more significantly down the road if you're successful with it. And you want to continue to ride that pony if that area is achieving particular growth. And then we have segment 2, it's actually a value brand. And from an interaction study we have, it actually shows that segment 2 directly competes with segment 5. And that when there's a price delta between those two, consumers might choose segment 2. So that might be something that they opt not to promote as much as other retailers may, and thus their category development index might be lower, because in those value brands there tends to be more price sensitivity and sensitivity to promotions. And then segments 1 and 2 may be true opportunities for them. And so by thinking this way and tying in with strategies and targets, you're really able to make those numbers hit the road more. And so I want to dig into this a little bit deeper to show you how you can do this. And that's with the index versus all sales share number. So these numbers that I talked about before, you need to look beyond that category. And that's because of this number, this 27.6, the category retailer share of market. How do you know if that's an acceptable number? If you just accept it as being acceptable and that everybody, the other segments, if you see a lot of Nielsen and IRI tools, they show the opportunity gaps related to this 27.6, so that if you bring up different segments or even different items, what's the value, opportunity value? That's once again, a very old-fashioned and non-strategic way of looking at this number. You need to look at that retailer share of market for the category and compare it to the all sales share for that retailer, which a lot of you should have available in your information. And so what the opportunity is there is to look at the retailer all sales share market share. So if they do 28.7% of the total, all of the sales within the total market for all of their categories combined, they do 28.7%. Then what happens is then you've got the 27.6, or the retailer share of market in green, divided by the 28.7, which is the market share in blue, to equal a 96. And so once again, what's the interpretation of that number? That your share, retailer share in this category is 4 points less than your overall market share for the category, for the total all sales. And so that's all you can interpret. But if you can compare those numbers to other related categories, like say this is beer. Beer is a simple example. And I compare it to wine and spirits and some other alcohol related categories, and I see that their numbers are right around that same number, then that 96 isn't necessarily a negative number, or maybe the opportunity is to bring it up to a 97 or 98. And the reason you can't interpret that as being we want to get to a 28.7 is because within this all sales market share, there's a huge combination of categories associated with it. And if this retailer is small in liquor, for whatever reason, or they have it separate from the store, they have some kind of reasoning behind that, or if they're super highly developed in other areas in the store that relate to that all sales market share, that number is just a number. So by comparing it to related categories, it really helps those numbers sing. And then from there, once you've got the retailer share of market and your retailer target market share, so say I do want to get my number from a 27.6 to a 29.3, I've done some analysis, I've gone through, and I've actually been able to identify the biggest opportunity areas, which identified as segment 1, 3, and 4 to grow based on that other chart that I showed you. And then you can calculate opportunity gaps of where you're going to get your extra volume based on those goals. And I'm not going to go through the formula here, but it's a basic formula that takes your retailer target market share minus your current share and multiplied by the total market sales to equal $2.75 million. So some really great ways to use those numbers. And then those can be incorporated into your scorecards for this category so that these become living, breathing numbers so that you're actually tracking this. And then you can figure out within these different opportunity gaps, you can tie in with shopper measures and panel data information to start to measure. Do we want to increase penetration, or is there an opportunity to increase trips per buyer? So you've got to dig deeper. You can't use these numbers superficially because this on its own is not helpful. You need some action and some opportunities identified from that. So make sure that you dig deeper beyond your category development index to draw insights from your data. Don't accept a simple set of data like this as over and underdeveloped, and start using these indexes, this category development index, as a benchmark versus targets that you establish to really help you to achieve your category goals. Okay, next one is fair share index. If you've ever gone into a retailer, or as a retailer, if you have salespeople or any category people come in and saying, we're not getting our fair share index of the shelf or assortment or promotions or whatever relative to our share. honestly, if that's all they have and they're coming in to push for that, I'd probably throw them out of the office, honestly, because fair share index, once again, it's only a number. So if we go back and look at how fair share index ties in with these other numbers, you can see that the fair share index is the segment tactic share divided by the segment category share. So in this example, I have a share of items here. So if I go and pull my numbers from wherever I get them, Nielsen or retailer point of sale, I can see what the share of items is for each of the different segments. And so segment one has 18.3% of the total items in the category. And so it's 18.3 divided by 20 equals 92. And then you can compare those indexes across all of the different segments. And so you can conclude from this that segments 1, 2, and 5 have less items in their category share. And then you can see that segments 3 and 4 have more items in their category share. That's it for now, because there's no strategy or basis behind this. And it's interesting because segment 5, like I said, is private label with a 76. Well, that's because typically a lot of private label SKUs carry more because it's going to be large sizes or really big value items and those kind of things. And so what you can do with your fair share indexes, and this example I have for coffee, if you have your fair share indexes comparing across feature, display, items, shelf, you can also have these for some of your online measures as well, depending on how your data breaks out across these segments. But like I can see in this example that brand C is getting poor development, right, or poor support across everything. But if brand C is from that segment 2 that I was saying, that's the value segment for them, then they might be okay with that because that's part of their strategy. And it's the same thing with brand E. When you see that brand E has a super high relative to their share, that's a strategic part. And so it's not that you have to accept these numbers, but you have to think of them beyond just what the numbers say when you're trying to figure out where the biggest opportunities are. So you really want to tie in with the retailer's overall strategies, or even internally, if you're doing this as a supplier within your brands, to use these once again as benchmarks so that you can then start to further expand into the different areas. I also really strongly suggest that you look at things from different perspectives than just brands. So in here we have ground instant being small, medium, large. So the most important decisions based on the category decision tree of these are the most important things that shoppers are making decisions on. So you've got to be looking here, because then when you're looking at these fair share indexes on a grid like this, they become much more meaningful to really help you to understand, if you know your strategies across these, where you're really potentially messing up and where you might want to be making adjustments. So when I'm doing my assortment, I might want to look at something like this first to really understand from the fair share index for the number of items where the biggest opportunities are. So in that, all I can say here is don't simplify your interpretation of the numbers. Kind of see it as there's a roadmap that you have to follow, and it's not going to be the same all the time, but you really need to dig deeper for meaningful insights, because those numbers on their own are not insights, they're just numbers. You want to ensure you're properly interpreting the data, and you're also wanting to use the index for your targets and goals, because they can become really helpful for you as you go to try to measure things moving forward. But if you see people using these numbers as, oh, that's bad because we're at a 102 or 104, don't interpret it that way. The only time that might not be true is if you are doing index versus targets and it's your sales targets, then you might have a hard time negotiating that, unless it's the same thing where, you know, your index versus target for your customers or your categories are low, but you compare it to other related categories and such, and they're also low, then perhaps it's the target that has the issue. But sometimes that's not a great argument anyways. So that's it for today's session. I hope you found that useful. I have such a big passion for, you know, really dissecting some of these numbers. We can do things. So first of all, you're going to receive an email with a resource book for this course. So if you did participate with us in the Zoom meeting, then you'll be receiving an email in the next few hours. Make sure that you look into the instructor-led virtual training. This is one of the areas that I think can be so great for us to roll up the sleeves and actually look at some of your own category data and start to draw insights from them to help teach your team, whether it's your sales team, your Catman team, or whatever. And also for retailers, if you tend to rely too much on supplier interpretations of things and you're not sure how to use indexes, this is the kind of stuff that retailers are really investing a lot of time against, is getting trained on some of these different areas as well. And also, if you want to get more training and insights and you're an individual in here, then there's an opportunity to buy an annual subscription that gets you access to a lot of really great virtual training sessions for a pretty limited price. So thank you for participating today. I'm going to wait on the line to see if there's any questions. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this, please share this with your LinkedIn network. If you enjoyed it, and I really appreciate that. The next session we have is next Tuesday on improving your omni-channel understanding. Thanks very much, and I hope you have a great day. Happy learning. Looks like there's no questions. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.